So, Eric, we talked about how depressed we were about the primary numbers coming out of Ohio. Then we talked to David Pepper, who tried to walk us off that ledge and, tell us that things weren't as bad as they seem. How are you feeling?
Well, the president of the United States believes that he's above the law and cannot commit any crimes. So, I'm feeling pretty good. No Republican has stood up and said this is wrong. So I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, we seem to be in a great place as a country. When was the last time you listened to Washington's farewell address?
You mean the song on Hamilton, or like actually read his farewell address?
I mean, actually read the address.
I don't think I've ever read the address.
Seriously, dude, it is.
You're like, when's the last time? Like, this happens like twice a week for you.
It is 100% worth reading.
Okay, I believe you. I don't think I've ever sat down and read the entire thing.
It is just so. It really made me think, like, oh man, he saw it all coming, and it just speaks so much to what's happening today. I mean, all the way down to, there was literally a line that I'm trying to find right now about obstruction of justice. Oh, here we go. Let me just read you this real quick. Listen to this. The basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. But the Constitution, at which at any time exists, till changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. The very idea of the power and the right of the people to establish government presupposes the duty of every individual to obey the established government. All obstructions to the execution of the laws, all combinations and associations, under whatever plausible character, with the real design to direct, control, counteract, or awe the regular deliberation and action of the constituted authorities, are destructive of this fundamental principle and of fatal tendency. I mean, it's just so getting to the heart of it, right? And I guess the problem is even in this, there are still stories about his poll numbers going up, and the Republicans, increasing their spread in the generic ballot with Democrats in 2018. And we're still a bit concerned. I mean, we're in Ohio. We just finished our primary, and we're wondering if the energy is still there.
And that's why we talked to two people here that have gone through the entire process, fighting day in and day out, but sadly came up a little short.
They did, and it's two very interesting campaigns. One that we know pretty well, Joe Schiavoni, who we talked to earlier, who ran for the Democratic nomination for governor here. We talked to his communications director, Rachel Coyle, who walked us through what it really took and what she saw on the ground, running a campaign that was truly an underdog campaign, one that had little money compared to the front runner, certainly Richard Cordray, and less name recognition than someone like Dennis Kucinich, but still went out there on the streets and what she found, and she was actually pretty optimistic at the end of the day.
And then we also talked to Tom Bullock, who ran for the Ohio State House, and he got caught up in a bit of a primary scuffle where it was a contest on who was the more liberal Democrat. So we talked to both of these people and we said, what can you teach us about what you went through? Because we can learn a lot from those who win, but we can also learn a lot from those who lost.
And it's going to be really important for the Democrats, if anything else, to really come together and have a cohesive party message that brings not only Democrats together, but pulls some Republicans and independents in this country as well.
We're here today with Rachel Coyle, who is the communications director for Joe Schiavoni for governor in the state of Ohio. Rachel, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Rachel, you're the communications director. Can you give us a brief summary on what a communication director does for a campaign?
So it's different campaign to campaign, but with ours, anytime we were interacting with the public or the press, I was involved in one way or another. So if it involved press releases or media events or setting up the candidate for interviews, that was part of my work. But I also helped, coordinate volunteer events and activities and ways for Joe to interact with the public. Anything that we needed, written or visual, I was a part of all of that. So it was great to have my hand in so many different things.
Now, Joe was the former minority leader in the Senate here in Ohio, and he had very little name recognition, even though he had a good-sized position. He did carry two of the counties in Ohio during the primary for governor, but those were the ones that were in his backyard. So one of the problems he had was definitely name recognition. I'm curious, what are some of the ways that you used to try to get his name out there?
So we knew from the start that was going to be a challenge, which is part of the reason that Joe started running so early, so that he could do literally going to events in small towns, maybe where politicians hadn't been in a long time especially, and meeting people on the ground because once you get that face-to-face interaction, people are going to remember you. And that was our game plan. And then we built out from there the idea that since we obviously couldn't meet everyone in the state, we would use social media, new media, that sort of thing to introduce Joe to larger groups of people. So even if he was in a room with, 15, 20 people, thousands of people would see it happening and they would feel like they were invested in his campaign. And that really, I think that worked amazingly well, for how little resources we had. We were able to reach tens of thousands of people. And I think that any campaign going forward should build on things like that.
And, that's one of the reasons we loved Joe as a candidate. I mean, when we had him on, we talked about that sort of the newer generation and what you could do to get those types of people involved as well. I'm wondering, one of the things we noticed and talked about a lot is just the money that you need to run.
Yes.
And I wonder, even with a great message and, these new tools you can use on social media, just how important is the money to a campaign?
Unfortunately, it's very important, and it sort of became a self-fulfilling prophecy with us. People assumed that we wouldn't have money, so they didn't give us money because they were not sure that the candidate could move forward in a way that would help him to raise money in the future. So it sort of became a self-fulfilling prophecy. We knew that would happen, though, so our entire messaging strategy was based around that idea that we would need to interact with people online and in new ways, and that we would need to have earned media and finding ways to interact with the press that didn't cost us a lot of money.
And what type of messaging do you think really worked best on the trail? I mean, especially with that type of attitude that you were just talking about. Is it that outsidery message that people seem to love? Is it, a more just kitchen table issues? I mean, what did you feel like really connected with people out there?
A lot of it was the idea that we were running an issues-based campaign. People told us over and over again that they were tired of the petty bickering that they see in politics so often, especially in national media right now. They really loved the idea that Joe had detailed policies based on actual bills that already existed at the State House, so that you knew that he was telling the truth because he was already working on it. People also like the idea that it's time for a new generation of leadership. I think that message especially can be carried forward with the Democratic nominee now. The idea that the current administration in the State House, especially with all these scandals we're seeing unfold, it's time for new leadership. It's time to end one-party rule and get some new blood in there so that we can shake things up. I think that same message can carry forward into the Democratic nominee in the general.
You talk a lot about Joe's strengths in this campaign, and I believe he had a fair amount. And I think that he is definitely a candidate we're going to be seeing in the future. But he only took 9.2% of the vote in Ohio for the Democratic primary. So I'm curious, where do you think it went wrong? Where do you think that you could have used more help in?
Well, there were a couple things that I don't think worked that we were hoping would. One was there was an interesting dynamic in this race where Dennis Kucinich was also a major candidate. And I think there was a segment of the voting population that was concerned for one reason or another that he would become the nominee. They were worried that, he wouldn't play well in a general, or they were worried that he was too far to the left for them. Whatever it was, there was a group of people who told us that they couldn't vote for Joe because of that. And our message was that shouldn't matter, that you should, vote your heart. And I don't think that message worked as well as we'd like it to. There's also the message we tried to play that money doesn't matter as much as it probably does in a primary, that people could vote for a candidate in the primary and then in the general, the money would come. And even though I truly believe that would be the case, that whoever the nominee is going to have the resources they need, that message was hard, especially because in order to get that message out, you, of course, need money. So that was definitely a sticking point for us in the election.
Well, so Rachel, I mean, you bring up some really good points, and it gets to this broader question, I think, because I've been pretty depressed lately about just everything going on generally, but also just we looked at a lot of the primary numbers and looked at it vis-a-vis the Republicans and the type of energy out there. I'm wondering, as someone involved directly in a campaign, after this primary, are you more optimistic or pessimistic about the future of the Democratic Party and the future of the state and the country?
I think that we have a real chance this time around in a way that we haven't in the last several election cycles, and that is exciting. But I also worry that people think it's just going to come. Joe said a lot that we have this blue wave, but it's only going to exist in Ohio, especially if we work for it. because in Ohio, it's very possible that the blue wave could miss us just based on our current political climate. So I think that the opportunity is very exciting, that there's passionate people out there and there's great candidates, especially down ballot, that could really move us forward as a state. But we have to not rely on any sort of outside influence in order to make that happen.
And do you think, I think a lot of it is just the media runs with some stories, right? And who knows how accurate they are and how real they are these days. In terms of this storyline that's going on with Democratic infighting in the party with the more progressive wing, and obviously people tried to gin it up during the governor's race, with as you were kind of mentioning, with the Kucinich-Cordray and then Joe obviously involved. Do you think that's a real divide in the party, or do you think it's all sort of manufactured?
Well, there's definitely a difference in political opinion emerging, where people are picking their favorite candidate based on, how far to the left they are on the political spectrum. But I'm not sure that it's a divide necessarily. There were people on our campaign who were very far to the left politically. They were very strong Bernie Sanders supporters last year. But we also had people who were very strong Hillary Clinton supporters who are more moderate politically. And we were able to get along very well because we all believed passionately in not only Democratic politics, but in the candidate we were working for. So I think that it's not a divide. It's more of a conversation that we're going to need to have as a party going forward as to which direction we head with our politics.
Running a campaign that was statewide, you worked with people that were in very red rural areas. You worked with people in very blue city areas. Looking at the Democratic Party here in the state of Ohio, what do they really need to do going forward, do you think, to help this wave actually happen?
So Dems are going to need to walk a very fine line in November because in the primary, polls were showing that a lot of Democrats were looking for a candidate who would be able to stand up to Donald Trump as one of their number one issues. But there's also this large segment of general election voters who could vote Democrat who are worried that Democrats don't stand for anything, that we're just the anti-Trump party. So the candidates that are successful are going to have to find this incredibly narrow line where they are strong and they make clear that they would stand up to an administration that went too far in any area, but they are also detail-oriented and policy-oriented and able to get things done policy-wise to make people's lives easier. I also think that Democrats are going to need to work on relatability. Democrats tend to have trouble explaining complex policy issues in a way that people can understand. Republicans are great at it. They can pick one or two talking points out of a very complex policy issue and just hammer them home until people can recite them back. And Democrats can work on that, I think, and take that branding and really work together to get that message out. And if we do that, we can win.
Do you think that Democrats, policy-wise talking here, do you think Democrats really need to go to the Republican way and do the short snippets? Or, for me, I like the nuance, right? I kind of think maybe that's why I'm a Democrat. I want to know what they're going to do. Do you think that to get the vote, though, we have to I'm lacking a better term here, but dumbing it down is where we need to go next?
I don't think it's dumbing it down necessarily. I think there's always going to be people who care deeply about the nuance, and so we need to be able to talk about it. But you also need to be able to, go to someone who's not focused on politics every day because they're, trying to put food on their table and get their kids to school and they're working on their own daily lives, and explain something hugely critical to them quickly. And it's not dumbing it down. It's just giving them a version that they have time to take in on a critical issue. I think ECOT is a really good example of that because I tend to get drawn into nuance on ECOT. E-school reform is very important to me personally. And I tend to want to give people every single detail about the issue. But
can you give our listeners a brief reminder of what that is?
Well, sure. So right now, Ohio is dealing with 2 potential FBI investigations, and one of them has to do with ECOT, which is an online charter school. And there's tons of detail I could go into about student data collection and full-time equivalency reviews. But the thing to know is that there is a guy out there who decided to make money by taking literally hundreds of millions of dollars from Ohio's education budget and funneling it into a school, which funneled it into programs that he had set up himself to make himself money. And that left thousands of Ohio students without diplomas, high school diplomas. And that, I think, is the perfect example of how I want to go into detailed policy about what ECOT is. But if I don't get that basic message across about why ECOT matters to you, then why was I even talking about it at all?
Right. It's kind of what gets me though sometimes, right? I mean, it's almost like we always have to play that salesmanship game so much,
right.
And it really. A lot of people, you're right. I mean, I don't think understand what's going on with ECOT generally, and the fact that we have to pitch them these couple lines to get them on our side when the other side's good at it too. It makes it feel like that kind of game that we're all playing, and real people's lives are affected. And I don't know how you solve that, right? I mean, it'd be great if we just could have those nice long conversations. We obviously can't in our country, and I think that's what we were talking to David Pepper about it too. I mean, it really. At some point, it's like, what's wrong with the voters? Like,
no, I think it's the idea that if we get the messaging right, we draw them in with that one or two big important lines. Like ECOT is a huge scandal. It's stealing hundreds of millions of dollars from you and leaving kids out on the street without a diploma. And then people want to know more from there. And that's when you get to go into the nuance. But you have to draw their eye first. And if we do it wrong, they're not going to be interested in the nuance because they don't see at all why the issue matters to them.
No, right. No, I completely agree with you. Like, you have to do it that way. But it's just one of those things.
Yes, I do wish I could have a detailed policy conversation with everyone in Ohio. But unfortunately, as we learned in this last campaign, the state is a little bit too big.
Yeah.
One last question for you.
Sure.
What's next for you? Now that the Schiavoni campaign is done, what do you plan to do?
I have been actually spending the last week or so doing laundry and cleaning my house, which has been really, really important. And I know that I want to be involved in politics in Ohio, especially leading up to the November election, but I haven't decided yet in what fashion that will be.
Well, we'd love to have you back on later when you do figure that out later on as we get closer to the elections. We can hear what you're thinking.
Absolutely.
We're here today with Tom Bullock. Tom, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Tom, you've been serving on the Lakewood City Council for quite some time. When did you actually start? When did you first get elected?
I ran and got elected in 2007 and started serving in 2008. So it's more than 10 years now.
Can you tell us a little bit about your job responsibilities as a city councilman?
Overall, we're the legislative body. So when you need to make a law or pass a budget, you're going to talk to your council person. On top of that, there is the traditional role of neighborhood problem solver or troubleshooting a development or working on specific concrete problems. The traditional voter or homeowner or neighbor often will think of going to his or her local mayor or council person as one of the first things to do on fixing a problem. So there are formal duties like passing a budget and passing laws, and then there are the informal duties, which are the neighborhood support and problem solving that I just talked about.
You were just campaigning. Can you tell us a little bit about your race? You ran for the state representative for the 13th district in Ohio. Can you tell us about what you've learned, what you've taken away from this?
Yes, thank you. I have been on city council since 2008, and wanted to serve the community in the state legislature, and so ran for office. I did not win the primary election though, so another person will be the party's nominee, and I'll look forward to supporting him as our party's standard bearer. But what I wanted to do was strengthen the community just on a broader scale. The district that Lakewood is included in includes Lindale and Cleveland, parts of Cleveland's west side. And in fact, Gordon Square Arts District and goes up to Ohio City. It includes Edgewater, Cadell. It's a great district. In fact, I think it's the most compact, dense state representative district in the whole state. So it would have been an honor to have had the chance to serve, but wasn't meant to be. I think that the kinds of things I would have liked to have done would be to get resources, to find ways to get state government to be a much better partner to local government than they have been in the last 7 years, when we've seen nearly 50% cut to the local government fund, encroachment upon city powers to collect taxes, which have had the effect of cutting $3 million annually from Lakewood's budget, and $200 million over 8 years from Cleveland. Now, there's a place for tightening your belt and driving efficiency. We've done that, but we've now passed into cutting into meat and bone here. Cleveland needs resources. You can't expect to have good infrastructure and strong neighborhoods and development if you're cutting so drastically and not providing the financial capacity to replace that. So I think that the state government hasn't done a good job, and frankly, we need a better job by our state delegation to get a better result in getting an investment mentality from Columbus, so that you have communities being functioning as they need to, which is to first of all deliver a safe and high quality of life to residents who want to stay here, and secondly to drive innovation. When you have state government basically forcing local communities to raise taxes or else lay off police or fighters, or to damage their own school quality, that's not moving in the right direction, because you cannot have good communities without safety and quality schools. So that's a big picture that I wanted to talk about. Now, when I talked big picture issue, when I door knocked to talk to people in Lakewood and Cleveland, we didn't quite get into that mode, but I did convey into that level of detail. But I did convey that the philosophy that I brought would have been to be a resource bringer, try to get state government to provide grants and funds, and to be a partner that invests in people and infrastructure, things like Lake Erie water quality. A lot of room there, by the way, for nonpartisan or bipartisan work, which is, I think, the way to go for now, because if not always, because if you haven't noticed, the Democrats haven't been winning elections in very many places in Ohio for a whole series of reasons, but we can't wait to be successful. So I think we need to learn to work on a regional basis with Republicans in Northeast Ohio on some of these urban issues.
One of the things we've seen during the Democratic primary was this idea that some people just aren't liberal enough, a true liberal versus a fake, right? In your race, as we were doing a little bit of research on this, we saw some of these comments online and whatnot, the same thing going on. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with this? Did you feel attacked at all by your opponents or other people in the party, or this divide really? Is it happening out there? And do you think it affected your run?
Yes and no. I think that I know what you're referring to, but I think this is an insider's game. This is like the drama among the gossip columnists that cover the red carpet at the Oscars, and so-and-so said something rude about another person who did or didn't like a gown. This is all silliness and a distraction. If you talk to the voters aren't plugged into any of this stuff. The voters care about, jobs, good schools, good communities.
Do you think that's actually true, though? I mean, in our society now, do you really think voters actually go to the voting booth and think about jobs and healthcare, or do you think they actually just look at I think you said it exactly right, the red carpet issues, the glitzy entertainment issues? Those are the things that get headlines, and that's how our press and media works. And it seems to have an impact. I mean, look at from every level of government, from local to the president, that is what gets attention, these kinds of smears and entertainment shock value. So I love that when you talk about how important jobs are and innovation and technology. Do you think that you can actually have that conversation with the average voter, particularly in a primary, when that's when sort of those gossip people are the ones that do participate, for better or worse?
Well, yes, because remember how enormous the country is, and the Democratic Party is, and Cleveland is, and Lakewood is. Lakewood's a big little town, or a little big town, 52 some thousand people. And I'm worked the community for more than 10 years. I know a lot of people. I don't know all 52,000 people. Every time I go door knock, I meet somebody new who is a a great neighbor or thoughtful person, but they're living their life, raising a family, earning a living, taking care of their home, doing their thing. So there are different circles of engagement, and the 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 pushing and shoving around, it happens on the right as well. Tea Party versus business Republicans, or whatever mainline Republican used to be, because that party's, I think, shifting rapidly to the right and going over the cliff of reason. But that kind of stuff is for the activists and the party engaged people. It may be even among some donors. That's an important group, but that's not everybody. And so at times the tail is wagging the dog on these perceptions.
But those people do seem to have a lot of influence on where the party goes. I mean, just look at how much the Tea Party affected where the Republican Party became in 2016. Do you think something like that is happening within the Democratic Party right now? Are we having a big push to the left, and do we have to worry about that if we are?
Well, maybe, but maybe not. First of all, the reason the Tea Party was successful was because it wasn't just a grassroots thing. It was that plus decades of Fox News and angry right-wing radio, and they linked up with gerrymandering and super PAC money. So there's institutional support for the so-called militia voter movements at the ground level. That's all. There's analogies, I think, between the right and the left, but it's also apples and oranges. What works and the dynamics that play out in the Republicans, and really, it's not all Republicans, it's the right wing, look a certain way, but those same tactics, if you photocopied them or airlifted them and put them on the left, would not work the same with the left. Now, actually, that may be exactly the point, because I think there's a natural frustration, a human frustration that many on the left, including me, feel. I grew up under Reagan, and ever since Reagan, it seems that the progressives have been on the defensive. And why can't we fly our values loud and proud? And it seems always that Democrats and progressives are having to apologize. We're not that liberal, and conservatives, they're pushing. Well, so the tendency is to want to fight fire with fire. Now, that makes sense to do if it works. The question is, does it work? And I know that there's a belief among some activists that would argue the reason why Democrats don't win is because we don't shout our principles loud enough. And the way to persuade people that our principles are the correct principles is to shout louder. And the only reason why we're not shouting louder is because we're incompetent boobs, or we're corrupt, or we lack our courage, or pick your reason. Now, maybe that's true somewhere, or it's been true here and there some of the time, but I doubt that that is what is going on for all Democrats, or the Democratic Party, or even the Cleveland Democrats. I think what would be the acid test would be to say, all right, let's get some Cuyahoga County Democrats, now go campaign in Van Wert, Ohio, go campaign in New Philadelphia, go campaign in Marietta, Ohio, go campaign in anywhere outside the obvious blue areas, and see how well that goes. And maybe it's worth a try. But I think that what people who are native to those local communities would tell you is that you need flexibility in the Democratic Party to adjust to what the local culture and norms are, and that the Democrats are a big tent party, and the way for us to get a majority is a couple of things. First, get rid of gerrymandering and super PACs, which is going to be difficult. And second, to go back to a party era in which worked very effectively all the way through the mid-90s, in which there were blue dog Democrats and yellow dog Democrats, and there were moderates and all kinds of things. And it was very frustrating when Bill Clinton first did his budget, which included some tax increases, building on what George H.W. Bush did, and led to balanced budgets for years on end, and a boom in the 90s. But and what happened was a lot of Democrats attacked that budget that Bill Clinton put out, which is very frustrating. But I suspect that that is probably the high watermark for Democrats during this current generation, that there has been a generational change and shift in experience and attitudes from the New Deal generation, which grew up during times of hardship and sacrifice during the Great Depression and World War II, compared to prosperity Democrats, the baby boom generation, who grew up with peacetime and plenty and American dominance of the industrial economy and howdy doody and stable homes and families. The values of the one are radically different, and the experiences radically different than the values and experiences of the second. Then add those of us on this call or in this interview. I'm a Gen Xer. I wish I was a millennial. You guys are Gen Y, I suspect.
I think
that's a whole different thing.
Millennials? Yeah. Is that Gen Y too? I'm not even sure.
Same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's mushy. Probably the test there would be whether you can watch Stranger Things and not have to look up any of the references on Wikipedia.
That's fair.
That's whether you're Gen X or millennial. But we have our own experiences, and those are going to be needed to come. Need a chance to come to the fore, because the working theory I'm toying with is that we're living in a baby boomer driven era of politics. And so it may be in the future that we could return to a time when FDR style New Deal political platforms sold very quickly and easily and better. But right now, when you talk about things like Social Security and Medicare as minimal safety nets, that doesn't seem like that does it for a lot of baby boomer voters. They want more than that. They want tax cuts. There's an old saying that in America there are no poor people. There are only temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
Right. That demographic shift you talk about is fascinating, and I think there's something to be said there about the values that even the Democratic Party or progressive folks generally had during the New Deal era compared to now. I wonder, looking forward, whether you're optimistic or pessimistic that we actually will get back to those values that you talked about, or whether we're entering a different type of age. I mean, when I think about the types of discussions that are had now, particularly, and I think a lot of it has to do with our media and our 24-hour news cycle, there's so much siphoning off and siloing up really of opinions and sources and information that the middle is just dropping out. You have people retreating to their far ends, and it makes the average voter really tune out. And so someone who's been involved for a decade or more in local government and seeing how voters react to things, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future? Do you think that the average voter can re-engage into a system that people are just sick of?
I am optimistic, and this is an important question you posed. I think optimism is a choice, and that the choice for Democrats should flow from our values, which are very different than at least what the modern Republican ideological right wing has made as their values. They've chosen anger, grievance, resentment of the other tribe, whatever that is, and that changes from election to election. Democrats need to not follow their lead there, as tempting as it is to fight fire with that kind of fire. We are the party of hope and change. We are the party of compassion. The reason we fight for equality is because we believe people matter, and we care about you. You're not just a cog in an economic engine or a consumer to be drained of your financial resources. And so for all of that to work, you must believe in the confidence. You must have confidence in the American enterprise, and you must have some faith in the little d democracy that we all are. You must have some faith in people. And that can be a challenge at times because people certainly do consistently make choices that aren't the best long-term choices. We see that in climate change. We see that right now with financial responsibility in the federal government. We're looking at trillion-dollar deficits for decades in a row under the Trump tax cuts. And why does this stuff seem to sell? But if Democrats are going to do our job, which is to keep moving forward the American project of expanding equality, expanding justice, and expanding opportunity, then I think we have to retain that rooted confidence in what we're doing, and that is a choice that all of us have to make as individuals and as leaders. So, when FDR was facing the depths of the Great Depression and made his famous comments about nothing to fear but fear itself, he had to fight a battle, an internal battle. Same goes for John Kennedy, who challenged everybody to do something we've never done before. Go to the moon. We're going to have such confidence in American enterprise and science that we can do it. When Barack Obama said, let's all take the step beyond racial bigotry and this horrible history in America of racial bias does not have to be the final and defining chapter of our story, but we're going to write a new one. That's the kind of distinctive, shall I say, something as technocratic as brand positioning that the Democrats need to hang on to. So how we're going to beat Trump is not by out-Trumping Trump. And how we're going to beat the really terrible and counterproductive dead-end hate and anger of the ideological far right is not by being louder than them. I think it's going to be by being constructive. We're going to be thoughtful and reasonable, and we're going to be people who solve problems and find solutions. So there will come a day, I think, when the public mood is going to be more in line with those things. And if we have done our work to provide some solutions that really matter to people, I think it's gonna show up in the results at the polls. And even when it's difficult, life doesn't last forever. All you can hang on to is the good you do in the world. So I think we need to stick to that.
You talk about having your faith shook by the events that are going on. I think when Donald Trump won that presidency, there was just an audible gasp from the country, and I think that shook a lot of people's faith. And I love the idea of being optimistic with it, but there's still a part of me that fears that it'll turn so many people off instead of turning so many people into activists. And we're seeing a little bit of both right now, and I hope you're right. I really do. And I want to thank you for coming on the show today and talking with us and telling us about your experience out there.
Thank you, and I'd be happy to talk some more again. These are the vital issues of the day and for our party, and so you're doing the right thing by asking them.
I was really rooting for Joe Schiavoni in all this, and he didn't have all the money in the world, he didn't have all the name recognition in the world, but I believe he had the ideas, and I wanted to see something like that go further. And I think what Rachel agreed with was, if you don't have the money, it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, that was very clear. I will say it was really good. There are obviously so many good people out there trying to make that type of change and get good people into office, and not just the candidates, people like Rachel who are working on the ground, and people in local office like Tom, dealing with, frankly, just a bunch of crap, right, in terms of all the political stuff that you have to deal with in any campaign or any political office, but doing it with a sense of optimism, which is pretty incredible. I don't know if I could do that like they do it.
Day in and day out, it's hard. It really is hard, especially when you lose at the end. And we're talking to two people here that worked hard and didn't get it, and they're still optimistic about what's to come. I mean, that kind of makes me feel a little better. I think I can look at this and say, yeah, if they can look at the sunny side of all this, maybe I need to be a little better at it too.
Yeah, and frankly, they're the ones on the ground, right? And I don't know if that means that they are, and I mean this in a good way, but blinded by it just because their day-to-day experiences, because they see it on the ground and can't kind of see the macro level that maybe we look at it a bit more and say like, well, where's the movement? But it's just nice because we have someone with that type of experience on the ground telling us that things aren't as bad as they seem. And then we had someone like David Pepper who looked at the more macro level and told us it wasn't as bad as they seem. So it's still going to be a really interesting year. I'm still concerned for a lot of reasons. But,
as we should be.
Yeah.
As we said at the beginning, I mean, things are not going right in this country right now. And it scares me that if we don't do this right now, it's not going to happen. And I think so many people are just being turned off by all this. I really do. And I really want to encourage and enlighten and get so many people involved. I don't know how to do that. I don't. I mean, no one listening to this everybody listening to this is already involved in politics or interested in politics, So how do you get people outside of that involved?
Yeah, I think that's what everyone's trying to figure out, especially the Democrats, right? Republicans have their way. You can just get everyone riled up about, base issues like race and fake patriotism and kneeling and things like that. Democrats don't really have that. I mean, they have the anti-Trump thing, but people, as you said, people are kind of sick of that now. What kind of conversations can we have that draw people in? Do people want to be drawn in by those types of conversations, or do you have to go to that base level mentality? I don't know the answers. It's going to be an interesting year, and I think the way that we'll know which way it's going, it's going to be the type of conversations we're having. Are they about policies and issues and the direction of this country, or are they about those, kind of fringe things that rile people up but really don't matter at the end of the day?
And as we go forward with this podcast, we're going to take a little break here for the month of June. Sohan and I both have big things coming up that is going to take up a lot of our time coming up. And then when we come back in July, we're planning to do something a little different. We're going to look more in depth at specific issues and try to dive in a little bit into the history and what makes us want to vote for these issues now and what do we think the best way to talk about them is.
So we hope you stick with us, and we'll be back really soon. And in the meantime, you can always follow us at bluewavepod.com or on Twitter and Facebook at Blue Wave Pod.